fire hook. Adrian Cole dropped his car keys 3 times before he finally unlocked the front door. His hands wouldn't stop shaking, not because he was scared of losing his marriage, but because of the message he had seen 10 minutes earlier, a message that changed everything. Upstairs, Naomi was humming softly in the bathroom, like it was just another normal night, and somehow that made it worse. Adrian stood in the dark living room, staring at his phone again. The unread message was still there. She deserves to know the truth. No name, no explanation, just that one sentence. And the worst part? The woman he cheated with had disappeared 2 days ago without warning. No calls, no texts, nothing. But wait, that wasn't even the part destroying him inside. Because earlier that evening, Adrian discovered something that made his blood run cold. The woman he had an affair with knew Naomi. Maybe even more than that. He heard footsteps upstairs. Slow, calm, coming closer. Adrian swallowed hard. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times. Screaming, crying, thrown plates, divorce papers. But what happened later that night was far more terrifying, because Naomi didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't even look surprised. And when she finally smiled 5 minutes after his confession, Adrian realized something horrifying. His wife had been carrying a silence far heavier than the betrayal, and that silence was about to change both of their lives forever. Chapter 1. The perfect life that wasn't perfect. Adrian Cole looked like a man who had everything together. 38 years old, successful architect, clean suits, expensive watch, beautiful apartment overlooking downtown Chicago, and a wife people secretly envied. Naomi Cole had this calmness about her that made people trust her instantly. She wasn't loud. She wasn't dramatic. But whenever she entered a room, people noticed. Not because she demanded attention, because she made everyone else feel seen. That was Naomi, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays, the kind who checked if people got home safely, the kind who listened carefully when others talked. And maybe that was a problem. She listened so much to everyone else that nobody noticed when she stopped talking about herself, including Adrian. Every morning followed the same routine. Naomi woke up first, coffee brewing by 6:30, soft jazz playing quietly in the kitchen, Adrian reading emails while pretending not to be stressed. It looked peaceful, normal, even loving, but silence had slowly started growing between them. Not angry silence, not toxic silence, the dangerous kind, the kind that arrives quietly, the kind people mistake for comfort. Adrian noticed it months ago. Conversations became shorter. Dinner became quieter. Even their laughter sounded smaller. But instead of asking difficult questions, he buried himself in work. Because work was easier. Work didn't ask emotional questions. Naomi noticed it too. Of course she did. But Naomi had a habit. Whenever something hurt her, she became quieter instead of louder. And Adrian misunderstood that silence completely. One rainy Tuesday evening, Naomi stood beside the kitchen counter scrolling through her phone while Adrian answered another work email. "You're working late again tomorrow?" she asked softly. Adrian sighed. "Probably." Naomi nodded slowly. "That's the 3rd time this week. I'm trying to secure the Henderson project." "I know." Silence. There was again that heavy silence. Adrian hated it, but instead of fixing it, he escaped it. That was his mistake. A few weeks later, he met Serena. It happened during a client dinner downtown. Nothing dramatic, nothing intentional. That was the dangerous part. Serena was easy to talk to, easy to laugh with, easy to be around. She asked Adrian questions Naomi stopped asking months ago. "How are you really doing?" That question stayed in his head longer than it should have. At first, it was harmless. Coffee after meetings. Long conversations. Texting late at night. Adrian kept telling himself it wasn't cheating. Not yet. But emotional distance creates dangerous openings. And loneliness can make attention feel like love. Especially when someone makes you feel interesting again. Serena listened to him complain. About work. About stress. About feeling invisible at home. And every time Adrian talked about Naomi, Serena became strangely quiet. At the time, he thought nothing of it. Now, he realized those pauses meant something else entirely. But he didn't know that yet. At home, Naomi remained the same. Calm, gentle, patient, too patient. One night, Adrian came home after midnight and found Naomi asleep on the couch with the television still on. A cold cup of tea sat untouched beside her. She had clearly waited for him. Something twisted inside his chest. But instead of waking her up, he quietly covered her with a blanket and went upstairs alone. That moment stayed with him, because deep down, Adrian knew something painful. Naomi was still trying, and he was slowly giving up. But wait, here's the part Adrian never saw coming. Naomi had already noticed the changes, the delayed replies, the hidden smiles at his phone, the sudden gym trips, the emotional absence. She noticed everything. She just didn't confront him. Not yet, because Naomi believed something dangerous. She believed silence could protect love. And sometimes, silence destroys it faster. One Sunday morning, Naomi asked a strange question during breakfast. Do you think people can accidentally hurt someone they love? Adrian looked up slowly. What do you mean? Naomi shrugged gently. Nothing. Just thinking. But her eyes stayed on him for 1 second too long. Adrian felt uncomfortable immediately. Still, he ignored the feeling. That was another mistake. Days turned into weeks. The affair crossed lines quietly, then physically, then emotionally, and afterward, Adrian hated himself every single time. But guilt didn't stop him, because guilt without honesty changes nothing. The strange part? Serena never asked Adrian to leave Naomi. Not once. In fact, whenever he mentioned divorce, Serena changed the subject quickly. At the time, Adrian thought she was being respectful, but later he would discover the terrifying truth. Serena already had her own connection to Naomi, a connection Adrian never noticed, and that hidden connection was quietly pulling all three of them toward disaster. Then came the message that shattered Adrian's illusion completely. She deserves to know the truth. No name, no explanation, just those 6 words. Adrian stared at the screen for almost 10 minutes. His stomach tightened. His chest felt hollow. Because suddenly, every lie felt fragile. Every excuse sounded pathetic. Every moment with Serena became poisoned by one terrifying question. How much did Naomi know? Upstairs, Naomi laughed softly while talking on the phone to someone. Adrian froze. Something about that laugh unsettled him. Not because it sounded angry, because it sounded peaceful. Too peaceful. And for the first time in months, Adrian became truly afraid of his wife's silence. Because everything was about to change. Chapter 2. The silence started changing. The next morning felt wrong. Not loud wrong. Not obvious. Just different. Adrian noticed at the moment he walked into the kitchen. Naomi was standing near the window pouring coffee into 2 cups. Soft rain tapped against the glass behind her. The jazz music was still playing quietly like always. Everything looked normal, but something about her felt distant, colder. You barely slept, Naomi said softly without looking at him. Adrian froze for half a second. Neither did you. A tiny smile touched her lips. I sleep fine when my conscience is clear. The sentence hit harder than shouting would have. Adrian forced a nervous laugh, but Naomi simply handed him his coffee and walked away calmly. That calmness followed him the entire day. At work, he kept checking his phone every few minutes. No messages from Serena. Nothing. That was strange. Normally, Serena texted him constantly. Little things. Memes. Questions. Late-night thoughts. But now, silence. And silence was beginning to terrify him. Around noon, Adrian finally called her. No answer. Again, voicemail. He tried not to panic. Maybe she was busy. Maybe she needed space. Maybe his phone vibrated suddenly. Adrian grabbed it immediately. But it wasn't Serena. It was Naomi. Don't forget dinner tonight. Smiley face. That smiley face somehow made him feel worse. Because Naomi almost never used emojis. And suddenly, Adrian started noticing things. Small things. Strange things. Things he should have paid attention to earlier. Like how Naomi had stopped asking detailed questions about his schedule. How she no longer checked when he got home. How she stopped arguing completely. At first, Adrian thought fewer arguments meant fewer problems. But wait, sometimes silence is worse than fighting. Because fighting means people still care enough to react. Silence? Silence can mean surrender. That evening, Adrian came home earlier than usual. The apartment smelled like rosemary and garlic. Naomi was cooking his favorite meal. That immediately made his stomach tighten. "You cooked?" he asked carefully. Naomi looked over her shoulder and smiled faintly. "You sound surprised." "No, You just forgot what normal feels like." The knife in her hand chopped slowly against the cutting board. Steady, controlled. Adrian stared at her. Was she hinting at something? Did she know? But Naomi's face revealed nothing. That was the unsettling part. After dinner, Naomi sat on the couch, reading while Adrian pretended to watch television. Neither spoke much. The silence between them felt heavier than ever. Then Naomi suddenly asked, "Do you believe secrets always come out eventually?" Adrian nearly dropped the remote. "What?" Naomi calmly turned a page of her book. "Secrets," she repeated softly. "Do you think they stay buried forever?" Adrian swallowed hard. "I guess it depends on the secret." Naomi nodded slowly. Then she looked at him directly. And for one terrifying second, Adrian thought she knew everything. But then she simply said, "That's true," and went back to reading. That night, Adrian couldn't sleep. Naomi slept beside him peacefully while his mind spiraled. He kept replaying everything. The affair, the lies, the message, Serena disappearing, and the strange feeling that Naomi was somehow ahead of him emotionally, as if she had already reached a conclusion he was still running from. At 2:17 a.m., Adrian quietly got out of bed and checked his phone again. Still nothing from Serena. Then suddenly, a new message appeared. "Unknown number. Tell her before someone else does." Adrian's blood ran cold. He immediately called the number. Disconnected. His hands started shaking. What was happening? Who was sending these messages? And how did they know? But wait, it gets worse. The next day at work, Adrian finally saw Serena. Or at least, he thought he did. He spotted her entering a cafe across the street, wearing a dark coat. Adrian rushed outside immediately. Rain soaked his suit as he crossed traffic. But when he entered the cafe, Serena was gone. Only one thing remained. A white envelope sitting alone on a table, with his name on it. Adrian stared at it for several seconds before picking it up slowly. Inside were photographs. His heart nearly stopped. Photos of him and Serena together. At restaurants, hotels, inside his car. Somebody had been watching them. But that wasn't the worst part. One photo made Adrian feel physically sick. Because Naomi appeared in the background, standing across the street, watching. Adrian's breathing became uneven. No. That had to be coincidence. It had to be. Then he noticed writing on the back of the photo, "She already knows more than you think." Adrian rushed home early that evening. Panic filled every thought. The entire drive, his mind repeated one terrifying question. Why wasn't Naomi angry? If she knew, why was she still calm? When he opened the apartment door, he found Naomi sitting at the dining table alone. Candles lit the room softly. A single glass of wine rested beside her hand. She looked up slowly. "You're home early." Adrian couldn't breathe properly. Naomi studied his face carefully. "You look pale. I need to ask you something." Naomi tilted her head slightly. "Okay." Adrian stepped closer. "Have you been following me?" Silence. Naomi stared at him for several long seconds. Then, surprisingly, she smiled. Not happily, not warmly, just softly, almost sadly. "I was wondering how long it would take you to ask me that." Adrian's stomach dropped instantly. "What does that mean?" Naomi took a slow sip of wine. "You've been distracted lately, Adrian." "That's not an answer." "No," she agreed quietly. "It's not." Then she stood up slowly and walked past him toward the bedroom. But right before disappearing down the hallway, she stopped. Without turning around, she whispered, "She's not who you think she is." Then she walked away. Adrian stood frozen in the dark apartment. His pulse hammered violently in his chest. What did Naomi mean? Who was Serena really? And why did it suddenly feel like he was the only person who didn't understand what was happening? That was the moment everything started falling apart. Adrian barely slept after Naomi's warning. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the photograph again. Naomi standing in the background, watching silently. Not angry, not emotional, just watching. That image disturbed him more than screaming ever could. By morning, the apartment felt colder. Naomi moved around quietly getting ready for work, while Adrian sat at the kitchen table pretending to drink coffee. Neither mentioned the conversation from the night before. That silence felt intentional now, like Naomi was waiting for something, or maybe waiting for him. Before leaving, Naomi paused near the door. "You forgot your lunch." Adrian looked up slowly. "You still made me lunch?" Naomi gave a tiny shrug. "You're still my husband." Then she left. And somehow that hurt more than anger, because kindness during guilt feels unbearable. The entire day, Adrian couldn't focus. He kept replaying Naomi's words. "She's not who you think she is." Who was Serena then? By evening, desperation finally pushed him to Serena's apartment. But when he arrived, the apartment was empty. Furniture gone. Closets cleared. No photos. No trace she had ever lived there. The landlord barely looked up while locking another unit nearby. "You looking for the blonde woman?" Adrian nodded quickly. "Yeah, Serena." The landlord frowned. "She moved out yesterday. Did she leave anything?" The man hesitated. "Just this." He handed Adrian a small sealed envelope. Adrian's fingers trembled immediately. Inside was a single photograph. Nothing else. And the moment Adrian saw it, his entire body went cold. It was a picture of Naomi, much younger, standing beside Serena, both smiling at the camera. Close, comfortable, connected. Adrian stared at the photo in disbelief. On the back, written in black ink, "You were never the only one being watched." Adrian's breathing became shallow. His mind raced violently. How did Serena know Naomi? Friends? Co-workers? Family? None of it made sense. No, impossible. But the thought had already entered his head. What if the affair was never accidental? What if Serena approached him intentionally? The idea made him feel sick. Back home, Naomi was sitting quietly on the balcony watching the city lights. She didn't look surprised when Adrian walked toward her. "You found out," she said softly. Adrian stopped cold. "You knew." Naomi looked down at the cup in her hands. "I knew enough." "Who is Serena?" Naomi stayed silent. "Naomi." Finally, she looked up, and Adrian immediately noticed something heartbreaking. Her eyes looked exhausted, not angry, just tired. "Serena was my friend," Naomi said quietly. Adrian felt the world shift beneath him. "What?" "We met years ago." Adrian stared at her in horror. "You knew this entire time?" Naomi's voice trembled slightly for the first time. "No." Then she swallowed hard. "At least, not at first." Silence filled the balcony. Cold wind moved softly between them. Adrian felt nauseous. "How long?" Naomi closed her eyes briefly. "A few weeks after it started." Adrian stepped backward. "You knew I was cheating and said nothing?" Naomi laughed softly, but there was no happiness in it. "What exactly was I supposed to say?" "Anything." Naomi suddenly looked at him sharply. "You think I didn't want to scream?" That silence afterward felt enormous, because it was the first real crack Adrian had seen in her calmness. Tears filled Naomi's eyes slowly. "But every time I tried," she whispered, "I got scared." Adrian's chest tightened painfully. "Scared of what?" Naomi looked away toward the city lights. "Scared that if we finally said everything out loud, there'd be nothing left to save." And then, silence. Chapter 4, The Weight of Silence. The silence after Naomi's confession felt unbearable. Cold wind moved across the balcony while the city lights flickered below them. Neither spoke for almost a full minute. Adrian stood there frozen, trying to process what he had just heard. Naomi knew, for weeks, maybe longer, And somehow, that hurt more than being caught, because while he was lying, sneaking around and destroying their marriage piece by piece, Naomi had been carrying the truth alone. Quietly, that realization made him feel sick. "You should have told me," Adrian finally whispered. Naomi laughed softly again, but this time there was pain inside it. And what would that have changed? It would have stopped this. "No," Naomi said calmly. "It would have forced us to face what was already broken." Those words hit hard because Adrian knew she was right. The affair didn't begin the day he touched Serena. It started long before that, in ignored conversations, in emotional distance, in quiet loneliness, in all the moments they stopped truly seeing each other. But wait, that didn't excuse what he did. And deep down, Adrian knew it. Naomi stood slowly from her chair and wrapped her arms around herself against the cold. "You know the strange part?" she said quietly. "I kept hoping you'd tell me on your own." Adrian looked down immediately. Every ounce of shame returned at once. "I wanted to," he admitted weakly. Naomi nodded slowly. "But wanting isn't the same as doing." That sentence stayed in the air between them. Heavy, sharp, true. Adrian opened his mouth to speak again, then stopped, because suddenly another terrifying thought entered his mind. "Did Serena tell you?" Naomi's expression changed slightly. "No." "Then how did you know?" Naomi hesitated, and for the first time that night, she looked genuinely uncomfortable. That immediately frightened Adrian. "What is it?" Naomi looked down at her hands. "She came to see me." Adrian felt his stomach drop instantly. "What?" "She came to the apartment 3 weeks ago." The world suddenly felt smaller, colder. Adrian tried to process the sentence, but couldn't. "She what?" Naomi's eyes became distant. "She was crying." Adrian stared at her in disbelief. "She said she didn't know you were married at first." Adrian's chest tightened painfully. "But after she found out," Naomi continued softly, "she tried ending things." Adrian remembered those moments now. The strange emotional distance from Serena recently, the canceled meetings, the silences, the sadness in her eyes. "Oh my God!" Naomi looked at him carefully. "She loved you." Adrian immediately shook his head. "No, she did. No, she..." And that scared her. The room suddenly felt too quiet again. Naomi walked slowly toward the kitchen, while Adrian remained frozen near the balcony. "She kept apologizing to me," Naomi said softly from across the room. "She said none of this was supposed to happen." Adrian pressed his hands against his face. Everything inside him felt twisted now. Ugly, complicated, painful, because suddenly the affair no longer felt exciting or emotional. It felt destructive. Real people had bled emotionally because of it. And the worst part? Naomi was still somehow calmer than he deserved. "She told me something before she left," Naomi continued. Adrian slowly looked up. Naomi met his eyes carefully. "She said you looked lonely." Those words shattered something inside him instantly, because it was true. He had been lonely, but so had Naomi. And instead of talking honestly, they both disappeared into silence differently. Adrian through betrayal, Naomi through emotional withdrawal. Here's where everything changed. Naomi reached into a drawer quietly and pulled out Adrian's phone. His face drained immediately. "I found this weeks ago," she admitted. Adrian stared at the phone. His throat tightened. "You read everything?" Naomi nodded once. "Most of it." Adrian closed his eyes painfully. Humiliation flooded through him. Every message, every lie, every excuse, every fake business trip. Naomi had carried all of it alone, and still stayed. Why? That question haunted him immediately. "Why didn't you leave me?" he whispered. Naomi looked at him for a very long time before answering. "Because I remembered who you were before we stopped talking to each other." That sentence nearly broke him, because suddenly Adrian remembered too. The early years, late-night drives, cheap apartments, shared dreams, laughing until morning. Somewhere along the way, they stopped protecting the marriage emotionally, and silence filled the empty spaces instead. Naomi slowly sat down again. "But Adrian," her voice trembled now, If you had continued lying. She stopped talking. Adrian noticed tears finally sliding down her face. Small, quiet, controlled tears, but somehow more painful than screaming. I think that would have destroyed me completely. Adrian felt tears burning his own eyes immediately, because for the first time, he truly understood the damage, not just the cheating, the hiding, the emotional abandonment, the silence. That was the real betrayal. Naomi wiped her tears quickly. Then suddenly, she smiled, softly, almost sadly, and that smile terrified Adrian more than anything else that night, because it wasn't a smile of someone winning. It was a smile of someone emotionally exhausted. "What?" Adrian whispered. Naomi shook her head gently. "You know what's funny?" "What?" "I spent weeks imagining this conversation." Adrian's chest tightened again. "I imagined screaming at you." She smiled faintly. "Throwing things, slapping you, leaving dramatically." Then her smile faded slowly. But when the moment finally came, silence. Naomi looked directly into his eyes. I just felt tired. That silence afterward felt devastating, because Adrian suddenly realized something horrifying. Sometimes relationships don't die through hate. Sometimes they die through emotional exhaustion. And for the first time in his life, Adrian became truly afraid of losing her. What happened next, no one was prepared for. Chapter 5, The Confession. 3 days passed after the balcony conversation. 3 long, emotionally draining days. And somehow, things became even quieter between them. Not hostile quiet, not angry quiet, just fragile, like two people walking carefully across thin ice, afraid the wrong sentence would destroy everything beneath them. Adrian stopped contacting Serena completely, but that didn't stop the guilt. If anything, the silence made it louder. At night, he barely slept. Every time he looked at Naomi beside him, shame crushed him harder, because she still made him coffee in the mornings, still folded his laundry, still asked if he ate lunch. That kindness destroyed him emotionally. One evening, Adrian came home and found Naomi sitting alone in the dark living room. No television, no music, just silence. The kind of silence that forces honesty. Adrian slowly placed his keys down. Naomi didn't look at him immediately. "I talked to Serena again," she said softly. Adrian froze instantly. "What?" Naomi finally looked up. "She called me before leaving the city." Adrian's pulse quickened. "What did she say?" Naomi stared at him carefully for several seconds, then quietly answered. "She said you were going to confess eventually." Adrian felt his throat tighten painfully, because Serena was right. Deep down, he always knew this moment would come. Naomi looked exhausted, but calm, too calm. She said you hated yourself afterward every time. Adrian looked away immediately, because that part was true too. Naomi's voice softened slightly. She said you still love me. That nearly broke him completely. "Naomi?" "No," she interrupted quietly. "Tonight, you're finally going to tell me everything." The room suddenly felt suffocating. Adrian's heart pounded violently. This was it. No more hiding. No more half-truths. No more silence. And strangely, that terrified him more than getting caught. Because lies become easier to manage than truth after a while. But truth? Truth tears everything open. Naomi folded her hands together calmly. "I want honesty," she whispered, "even if it hurts." Adrian sat down slowly across from her. His hand shook badly. For several seconds he couldn't speak. Then finally, "I cheated on you." The sentence landed heavily between them. Real, ugly, final. Naomi said nothing, not one word. Adrian continued breathing unevenly. "It started emotionally first," he admitted quietly. "We talk a lot. Then it became physical." Still nothing from Naomi. No tears. No anger. No reaction at all. And somehow, that silence became unbearable. Adrian kept talking, because once truth starts coming out, sometimes it all pours out at once. "I felt lonely," he whispered, "but that's not an excuse." Naomi remained completely still. "I should have talked to you." Silence. "I should have stopped." Silence. I hurt you. Still nothing. Minutes passed. Literal minutes. And Naomi simply sat there quietly staring at him. That silence nearly destroyed him mentally, because Adrian realized something terrifying. Naomi wasn't processing the cheating. She was processing the loss of trust, the loss of emotional safety, the loss of certainty. And that damage cuts deeper. Then suddenly, after almost 5 full minutes, Naomi smiled. Adrian's blood ran cold immediately, not because the smile looked cruel, because it looked heartbreakingly gentle and completely unexpected. You finally told the truth, she whispered softly. Adrian stared at her in confusion. Naomi nodded slowly to herself, almost like she had been waiting for this exact moment. Then, quietly, she thanked him. Adrian blinked in disbelief. What? Thank you for finally being honest. Tears filled Adrian's eyes instantly. Naomi shook her head gently. I'm serious. She looked down briefly before continuing. You have no idea how painful silence becomes when you already know the truth. That sentence shattered him emotionally, because suddenly Adrian understood something devastating. The cheating hurt, but the pretending afterward hurt Naomi even more. The lies, the fake normal conversations, the emotional distance, that was the torture. Naomi wiped her eyes slowly, then looked directly at him. But listen to me carefully, Adrian. Her voice became firmer now. If you ever make this mistake again, silence, cold silence, you will lose me forever. Adrian immediately nodded through tears. I know. No, Naomi whispered. You don't. That silence afterward felt enormous, heavy, final. But then Naomi reached across the table slowly and held his shaking hand. And in that moment, everything changed forever. Chapter 6, After the Truth. The strange thing about honesty is that people think it immediately fixes everything. It doesn't. Sometimes honesty simply stops the bleeding long enough for two broken people to finally look at the damage together. That was what happened to Adrian and Naomi. The confession didn't magically heal their marriage. The pain was still there. The betrayal was still real. And trust? Trust didn't return overnight. But for the first time in months, the silence between them changed. It no longer felt poisonous. It felt honest. And somehow, that made all the difference. The morning after Adrian confessed, neither of them spoke much. Naomi stood quietly in the kitchen making coffee, while rain touched the window softly. Adrian watched her carefully from the dining table. Every movement felt fragile now, important. He noticed small things he had ignored for months. The tiredness beneath her eyes, the way she rubbed her fingers together when anxious, the tiny pause before she handed him his cup. He used to miss those things. Not anymore. Thank you, he whispered when she placed the coffee in front of him. Naomi gave a small nod. No smile, no coldness either. Just emotional exhaustion. And honestly, Adrian deserved worse. For days, their apartment felt unfamiliar, not because of shouting, because of carefulness. They moved around each other gently, like two people learning how to speak again after surviving a disaster. At night, they talked more, really talked, not about bills, not about schedules, about feelings, fear, loneliness, resentment, the things they had avoided for years. And slowly, Adrian began understanding something painful. The affair was not the first crack in their marriage. It was a result of many ignored cracks, small emotional distances left untreated too long. One night, Naomi sat curled beside the window while the city lights reflected softly across the glass. Adrian sat across from her quietly. She told me something before she disappeared. Naomi said suddenly. Adrian immediately knew she meant Serena. His chest tightened. What? Naomi looked down into her tea. She said you weren't a bad man. Adrian looked away painfully. I don't know about that anymore. Naomi shook her head gently. No, you made a terrible choice. Silence. But terrible choices and terrible people aren't always the same thing. Those words stayed with Adrian long after she said them, because guilt had consumed him completely these past weeks. But Naomi saw something deeper. Not just betrayal, broken communication, emotional neglect. Two lonely people slowly disappearing from each other without realizing it. Still, that didn't erase the damage. And Naomi never pretended it did. A few days later, Adrian finally asked a question haunting him since the beginning. Why did Serena approach me? Naomi became quiet immediately. Too quiet. Then she sighed softly. She lost someone she loved years ago because of cheating. Adrian frowned slightly. What? Naomi nodded. Her father cheated on her mother for years. It destroyed their family. Adrian struggled to understand. Then why would she get involved with a married man? Naomi's eyes looked sad. Because pain confuses people sometimes. Silence filled the room again. Naomi continued softly. She told me she didn't mean for it to happen. Adrian remembered all those conversations with Serena now. The emotional connection. The late-night talks. The loneliness. It all felt uglier now. More human. More tragic. She hated herself afterward. Naomi whispered. Adrian closed his eyes painfully, because he understood that feeling too well. Then Naomi looked at him carefully, but she also said something important. Adrian slowly opened his eyes. She said you talked about me constantly. That surprised him. What? Naomi smiled faintly. She said even when you complained about our marriage, you still sounded like a man in love. Adrian felt emotion tighten inside his chest immediately, because it was true. Even during the affair, he never stopped loving Naomi. He simply stopped protecting what they had. And there's a difference, a dangerous difference. Weeks slowly passed. Some days were better. Some weren't. Sometimes Naomi became distant unexpectedly. Sometimes Adrian caught her staring into space with sadness in her eyes. And every single time, he remembered what a betrayal had done. Trust returned slowly. Pain doesn't disappear neatly. But honesty had finally opened a door silence kept locked for too long. One evening, Adrian came home carrying flowers awkwardly in his hands. Naomi looked up from the couch and raised an eyebrow slightly. Flowers? Adrian gave a nervous smile. I realized I stopped trying. Naomi stared at him for a second. Then, surprisingly, she laughed softly. A real laugh. Small, but real. And that sound nearly broke Adrian emotionally, because he realized how long it had been since he heard genuine happiness from her. Later that night, they sat together on the balcony again. The same balcony where everything almost collapsed. Cold air moved softly around them. But this time, the silence felt different. Peaceful. Naomi leaned back in her chair, quietly. You know what scared me the most? She asked softly. Adrian looked at her. What? That you would keep lying forever. Her honesty hurt, because it was true. If those messages never appeared, if Serena never disappeared, would he have confessed? That question haunted him deeply. I don't know, Adrian admitted quietly. Naomi nodded slowly. At least that answer is honest. Silence settled between them again, but no longer cold, no longer empty, just thoughtful, human. Adrian finally looked at her fully. I'm sorry. Naomi's eyes softened slightly. I know. No, Adrian whispered. You don't understand. Emotion tightened his throat. I almost lost the best thing in my life because I was too emotionally weak to speak honestly. Naomi said nothing, but her eyes filled slowly with tears. Adrian moved closer carefully. I should have talked to you when I felt lonely. Naomi nodded faintly. And I should have stopped disappearing into silence whenever I was hurt. That moment mattered, because for the first time, both of them stopped treating the marriage like one person's failure. Relationships rarely collapse from one moment alone. Usually, they collapse from accumulated silence, ignored emotions, untouched wounds, unspoken fears, and sometimes people don't realize how far apart they've drifted until something painful forces them to look. Naomi reached for Adrian's hand slowly, and this time he held it tightly, not casually, not absent-mindedly, carefully, like something precious he almost destroyed forever. Far below them, the city continued moving loudly through the night. Cars, sirens, people, life. But up there on that quiet balcony, two emotionally exhausted people finally understood something important. Love alone is not enough. Without honesty, without communication, without emotional presence, even love can slowly starve. Naomi rested her head gently against Adrian's shoulder, and for the first time in months, he felt peace instead of fear, not because everything was fixed, but because the hiding was finally over. And sometimes, truth hurts less than silence. And arrow final ending. Sometimes betrayal doesn't begin with cheating. Sometimes it begins the moment two people stop telling each other the truth. Silence is dangerous. It creates distance quietly. And by the time people notice the damage, they're already emotionally lost. But honesty can still save what pride, fear, and silence almost destroy. Adrian learned that too late, but thankfully, not late enough. And maybe that's the real lesson. Sometimes the people we hurt most are still waiting for us to finally tell the truth. What would you have done if you were Naomi?